So with that, I'm going to introduce our first panel. I'd like to start off with our moderator, Lucas Mendes. Lucas is the CEO and co-founder of Revelo. So Lucas, welcome to the stage. And then if I can have Vidya and Jean and Prabhu and Navneet join us up here on stage. And then that's all you're going to hear from me. So that's it. Thanks, everybody, for being here. It's great to see you.
Hi, guys. Thanks for coming. I'm not in marketing. I won't pitch you. I'm an engineer. Yeah. Thank you so much. Guys, I'll start with the intro. So, first panel, Future of Engineering Leadership. Our panelists have built systems that are being used by tens of millions of people. They've led global teams, launched category-defining AI systems, and somehow still managed to find time to coach up-and-coming talent. What's fascinating is how much they have in common, despite coming from very different corners of tech. For starters, they've built AI-driven systems at serious scale, from scaling IBM's Watson's Assistant to over 100 million users to reshaping how private markets data flows at Forge. This group has been in the AI trenches long before ChatGPT made it a buzzword. And they've all led distributed global engineering teams, whether it's Thumbtack's cross-functional ML teams or Black Hawk's enterprise scale platform teams. They've proven that high-trust cultures can span time zones. So let's dive in and get to know them a little better. So Vidya, our first panelist, she brings decades of experience building at the intersection of fintech, infrastructure, and innovation. And she's been leading global teams long before remote first became the norm. She's the CTO of Forge, where she oversees product, engineering, design, data, and security. Please welcome Vidya. Our next panelist, Gene, has spent his career building high-performance team and scaling technical orgs. He is the Chief Technology Officer at eBroker, where he's reimagining the last mile of business insurance. Before that, he held CTO roles at TrueML and Allstripes and led engineering at Point by GoDaddy. He also has the rare distinction of having a user manual for working with him floating around on LinkedIn. It's very inspiring. Welcome, Gene. Next up, Navneet. We've got someone who's shaping the AI-powered future of local services. He's the Director of Engineering at Thumbtack, where he leads the core hiring experience team. These are the folks responsible for helping over 4 million customers connect with over 300,000 local pros. He's doing seriously advanced work in semantic search and Gen AI, and he's previously scaled Watson Assistant at IBM to serve over 100 million users globally. Please welcome Navneet. And last and definitely not least, we've got someone who's been building at the bleeding edge of payments, infrastructure, and AI way before it was cool. Prabhu Inbarajan is the Chief Product and Tech Officer at Colibri Group after an impressive run as VP of Engineering at Black Hawk Network, where he led global teams across payments, fraud detection, data science, and e-commerce. Please welcome Prabhu. All right, let's get started with a question for everyone, and we'll go in this direction, Vidya. So what excites you or worries you more in AI as an engineering leader?
Do I need the mic? Or?
You're mic'd up.
Oh, yeah, I forgot. Sorry. It's been too long. So I think I'm more excited than worried to begin with. I think of AI as really kind of pushing the envelope on innovation. So I'm really excited about the possibilities. Like if you think about, and in our era, most of the people here, we've really seen the change and the transformation that technology has brought, like back from the internet age, Wi-Fi, and the changes that's happened. Technology has really transformed the society as a whole, right? And you see innovation in our everyday life. I mean, it's changed fundamentally how we shop, how we get to places, how we search for information, and everything has changed. But every change, when it started, people were scared and more skeptical. But I think it's taken a lot of positives in terms of how much we are able to do from an innovation perspective, access to information. So I look at AI as sort of the next generation of transformation that technology is going to bring at this stage. And we are all kind of seeing it in different ways in terms of how we are able to process the amount of data, what kind of insights we are able, even on the creative front, the amount that AI is able to really push the envelope. So for the large part, I'm really excited about what AI can do and how AI is really going to transform what we do, and how, like all these movies that we just talked about, Matrix and Inception, I feel AI is bringing it closer to reality in a lot of different ways. So it's going to be like reading a sci-fi book, like, if you look at it from 10 years from now. So I'm super excited.
Great. Prabhu, your take.
I think what excites me is the art of the possible, right? I mean, several things that we thought of as pipe dream just rarely about 3 years ago. Now it's all within vicinity. I think it's about how we get work done and how we create value for our consumers, and both have improved tremendously. And I think we have gone over that wave of skepticism to the place where we are thinking about how to adopt, how to get work done, and how to deliver value to our consumers. And that's a fantastic transformation. Every business that you go to, this is the key question that the investors are asking the business, and the businesses are asking their internal workforces to do. I think in terms of what worries me is that there is a general FOMO around, if I'm not doing AI, I'm missing out something. I think it's mostly a question of how do you deal with it as an opportunity, and how do you look at it from an outside in. And the moment we get that, I think there is going to be a lot of that positive transformation over how you can bring value to our customers. So,
Gene, anything that worries you?
Well, I'll start with what worries me. Although transformation is the most exciting part, obviously. I would even say transformation in the flavored as disruption. But what worries me the most is that it's not clear where and how we're going to get senior engineers 2 years from now. Think about every engineer you've ever hired. If it's a junior engineer, they spend maybe half a year to a year before she becomes proficient. And then before she becomes the senior engineer, she needs to learn the business. Who's going to teach the business to the bots? It's not clear. So that's my biggest worry. And I'm not quite sure how to solve it yet. I have some ideas. Maybe we'll talk about them. Transformation, I think the most exciting disruption that I'm hoping will happen is the removal of lock-in from the gigantic enterprise systems. Think about every single gigantic enterprise system that you've ever interacted with, let's say Salesforce. Why is it so persistent, and why is Salesforce in a position to raise the price every single year, unlike every other platform that you've ever encountered? That's because it's very difficult to teach an organization the UX to that platform, even though we all know that behind it is just a gigantic Oracle database. So once the organization is hooked, it's almost impossible to repeat the pain of going to some other platform. And I think this is because the complexity of UX is such that it's become prohibitive for most companies to switch away. I think conversational interfaces may disrupt it, and we'll talk about that later also,
Awesome.
I think.
Love that.
Let's see, for me, the way I think about it is the advent of cloud computing, right? That's what defined a lot of practices and paradigms around how we manage teams, how we build software, and generally how we think about engineering as a whole. Recently, on a podcast, I heard Kevin Weil, the CPO of OpenAI, mention that the very best AI models that we are using right now, they're likely going to be the worst AI models that you'll ever use for the rest of your life. Now, really think about that for a moment, right? If you start internalizing what that really means for all of us within engineering, that really means that everything from how we build products to how we operate companies to how we even think about productivity, it's likely going to transform over the course of our lifetime. So to me, this is super exciting. Of course, there are worries and things that we'll want to think about, there's safeguards, etc. But I think we'll figure it out. We're pretty smart people in this room. We're here in Silicon Valley defining engineering. I think we can do it.
All right, let's stick with Navneet a little bit, and let's double click on how you think AI is changing, if it is, how you manage teams, how you lead engineering teams. Maybe the answer is it's not. It's not changing. I know the adoption curve. I mean, people are at different spots of the adoption curve right now, but I think your peers would love to hear the impact it's having.
I would say right now, right, if you think about the product development life cycle, everyone's trying to use AI and Gen AI tools in different phases of the product development life cycle, right? People are using it, like things like Copilot for development, you're using it for code reviews, you're using it for testing. I'm sure there's 100 other tools that are going to come up for different phases of the life cycle. So that's already happening. But then right now, I think as a consumer-facing company, what we're thinking about is we know that these models are just going to improve. So what we're trying to do is bake in optionality into our systems. So we're not trying to say, okay, this is the future, and making assumptions that this is that one path and the one vendor, et cetera, that's going to get us there. We're saying, okay, let's build in optionality and infrastructure layers such that you can support both open source tools, things like Llama. You can support OpenAI, AWS, all of these different vendors, and give our product teams the ability to choose based on performance, based on cost criteria, et cetera, because these criteria are going to be very different, right? A consumer-facing team trying to push performance, they have different criteria from, let's say, an operational team trying to reduce costs. So we're trying to say, let's bake in optionality into how we build these AI systems of the future, and don't make assumptions about things that are more than, let's say, 18 months out. Keep it optional for the moment.
And Vidya, before I think you mentioned some specific use cases where you are using AI and it's changing how you're managing your organization. You spoke a little bit about planning, code reviews, et cetera. I would love to hear more about that.
Sure. And I agree completely with you, Navneet. I mean, there's some of them is just basic in terms of how we are using it for programming suggestions, syntax, unit testing is another great one. And I love the ability to have optionality. But in addition, to your point, use cases are more around how we think about where we want to use AI, both from, and Steve, I know you said like, hey, we think marketing is like number 8 out of 10. But I think marketing is a great example of where I think AI plays a big role in terms of really helping, again, drive from a content generation perspective, outreach perspective, we see a huge impact on that. So how do we collaborate and sort of be a technology partner for different teams, right? So marketing is a great example. And the other use case we see is operational. So ways in which we can provide more operational efficiency, both in terms of time saved as well as manpower saved, right? Because a lot of things that we find, I mean, document, like we started a lot of it, we used to call it NLP, and you have this is all earlier generations of AI in a way. And the more you can process using, AI, you are able to kind of get a lot of that work done more efficiently. And as the models improve, the accuracy and the validation of the data collected to those processes, that we are now able to say that we can get it to the next stage if you think about the data pre-processing. So those are some use cases where we see a huge sort of value add with AI, just to give you some examples.
And Prabhu, where are you in the adoption curve? Where do you...
So we are pretty far along. I think both at Blackhawk as well as at Colibri, I think the companies have headfirst adopted AI. I think partly it comes from having the right leadership at the top, and the leadership is driving those sort of transformational changes, but also the companies now starting to learn the value of AI. And the initial uphill always exists in all the places, but once you get past that, I think AI in everyday work life just becomes part of the norm, whether it is co-pilots, meeting summaries, just everyday aspect of showing to work fundamentally changes, right? I mean, this is your, I look at it in the AI maturity model as your initial steps that people can take. Like, how do you understand documents? How do you parse knowledge? How do you deal with expression and communication? And in the past, if I missed out a meeting, I go watch a recording. Now I look at like my AI Copilot summaries. I mean, that's pretty basic level. Now, the next aspect of getting work done every day, I think just like what you mentioned, overall, my marketing toolkit is now AI enabled. My engineering toolkit is now AI enabled. We don't think about writing code anymore. We look at AI-based productivity tool sets either to improve test coverage or to write net new applications. I think it fundamentally transforms the way that work gets done, and that's your second stage. And then third is how do you add value to your customers, and where does it show up in everyday customer interaction? Again, we think about it in two steps, like where you have conversational bots, that's like everyday AI for consumers, and then where you're really having value with adding orchestration layers, like be it consumer self-service, be it how do you drive adaptive learning we are in the learning business, and obviously our customers are professionals that are trying to accomplish either a exam prep or continuing education. So if you go deep into the value chain, I think we are at that place where we are at that end of the value chain. I also wanted to make this mention that Navneet said, Kevin Weir, I think he said in that same interview, if you're on that leading edge of that development where your models are only going to be valid for like about 2 months, right? So that is your bleeding edge where things are constantly changing. So the teams are adapting to that pace of change, and that's a very welcome transformation. It has put that institutional inertia into some level of kickback, and now we are seeing a faster pace overall.
And Gene, during the first question, you went straight to people. Your concern was straight concern about people. Is AI changing the type of skills that you look for when you're putting together a great team?
I actually don't. And I don't think the nature of management changed. Prabhu mentioned the word orchestration. Orchestration is management. You're orchestrating a bunch of agents that maybe half a year ago, companies started selling each other this promise that don't hire a human, hire our bot. Then in a couple of months, it just subsided because it's obviously not the right message. But think about it this way. Even before Gen AI, and I want to distinguish Gen AI from the old style AI that's been with us for 3 years now. But even before Gen AI, some smart and enterprising engineers, usually senior engineers, would go on Upwork or Mechanical Turk and hire somebody and pay them 10% of their salary and then just like maximize their earnings this way. They have to get the burden of managing that person. And many of them figured out that that's actually harder than doing the work yourself, and that's why we're not seeing a lot more of this. Now the same promise is being made, like don't go to Upwork, just use Copilot or use Cursor or use something like that, and you'll be a lot more productive for the same salary. Again, going back to what I said before, it's not the coding problems that engineers are solving. Junior engineers maybe, for the first several months of their career. What real engineers are solving is a business problem. And it's not clear how you're going to teach those bots and how do you manage those bots in order to get to those solutions. Because ultimately, as a manager, you have to care about every single member of your team in 3 dimensions: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. None of those 3 things are currently present in Gen AI bots or systems. They might be 2 years from now. Well, 2 years from now is singularity, so who knows what's going to happen. But in the meantime, we still have an opportunity to make our people happier, to make them more autonomous, help them acquire more mastery. And most importantly, and that's something that we're going to be humans will have monopoly on this for a while at least, and that's the purpose, the ability to translate business problems into the right prompts, basically.
Awesome. I want to go back to your question about where are we getting senior engineers 3 years from now. What's your best guess?
It's for Gene, right?
Yeah, for him. Some people say product.
Well, one hypothesis that I'm testing right now is that junior engineers might do to coding what Africa did to cell phones. They didn't have landlines at all. And so the adoption of cell phones and the e-commerce exceeded European and American and even Japanese for quite some time because they were starting with clean slate. And so I think if we start hiring, all of us, through you guys or some other way, ambitious engineers who are from the new generation for whom Gen AI is part of their background, part of their ambience. And so this way, maybe they will come into the company and even start teaching business people and senior engineers how to do this stuff. So this cross-pollination of junior engineers who grew up with this, unlike the senior engineers who might be somewhat set in their ways, that dynamic might help, but I'm not sure. I'm just testing it.
Many of you, or most of you, actually have a lot of interface with product as well. You don't focus only on engineering. And I think one of the questions that we had was, how is AI influencing product strategy, especially considering ethics? I think there's an ethical consideration around this. I want to start with Navneet.
So back in the summer of 2023, right? This was the days when Meta just released Llama 2, and OpenAI, I think, had released ChatGPT 4 or something like that. That's when we were asking ourselves the question, we're a marketplace with millions of consumers on one side, hundreds of thousands of local businesses on the other side, and we recognize that, okay, these new generation of LLMs are going to be very transformative. So what does that do? How should we be thinking about the future? And we came up with basically like 3 questions we wanted to answer at that point. One was, how do we use the new generation LLMs to transform how we shape the product itself? The second was, how do we transform the operations of a company, especially like a tech company that we have? And then the third was, how do we think about productivity going forward? And let's say on the first question, right, on how do you use AI to transform the product, we said, okay, for example, we can go and use some of the latest Gen AI models to help our customers express their problems in a much more natural language-based way. You can ask them in a much more conversational setting, what's their problem, and then Thumbtack can understand you better. In terms of transforming, for example, the operations, we took scenarios like, how do you understand policy violations within our entire system, and maybe AI can transform some of that. And on the productivity side, we simply took it as a, hey, let's try out some of these newer age tools. And again, not just for engineering, but for different functions. What's available out there? Let's try it out. And so that's where we started in terms of how we wanted to think about these problems, especially regarding LLMs. I think now 2 years out, right? This is back in summer of 2023. 2 years in, we've been adopting AI for all of these problem spaces. And I think all of these considerations are still very much relevant. From an ethical standpoint, I think when we think about it, again, it boils down to each of these 3 questions. For the first question, how do you build a better product? I think as long as hallucinations are not becoming a part of your product, you have less to worry about. On the operations side of the house, I think there are definitely some ethical considerations to think about in terms of the human cost. And then on the last piece around productivity, I know people are hesitant to, sometimes adopt some of these new age tools, but I think of it as, hey, this is the future. If you're not adopting it right now, you're probably jeopardizing, your career and your prospects for, the next 5-10 years. So that's how I think about it in terms of, all the 3 questions that we were posing to ourselves.
That's great. Vidya, your take on that?
So the way I think about it, and maybe even coming from more of a financial services, so one of the things we think about both from ethical consideration, product strategy, and just a compliance, we want to be really careful about, yes, you want to make it easier and provide tools and advice, but we don't want to use AI to give investment advice, for example. So those are things that from a product strategy perspective and how we think about it, what are the right guardrails? That's one of the guardrails. And other things around, I think many people heard, like during the initial stages, they were like, hey, somebody could buy the airline ticket at $5, you could buy a car for $10, because again, you didn't have the right guardrails around. When we have a chatbot or other mechanisms, and it is a computer really providing the information, so a large part of it is really thinking through the guardrails guardrails and really focusing a lot on negative use cases, right? And I think because there is sort of no human in this process, you really have to be careful, because in the end, you are accountable for all of those. And sometimes those mistakes can be really expensive. And the other thing is also, there are a lot more rules, cyber rules that we have to be aware of. Fraud use cases are really going up. So again, thinking about it from that aspect. So I feel there is a lot more, it's a different mindset in terms of how we think about how you help the customer, but then how do you prevent all of these, from a customer getting either a defective solution, a defective product, or how do you protect their information? So I feel like there is a lot more thinking around what are the fraud use cases that we are not thinking about, and how do we make that sort of part of the product thinking. It's something I feel like we are starting to see where we really are focusing more. The more you use AI, that is also a huge, and the other aspect is also AI outputs are only as good as the data that you use. So again, putting a lot more emphasis on the data validation, the data accuracy, how you're collecting the data, because it's like garbage in, garbage out. So really making sure it's not garbage in is another factor. So I feel like there is a lot around those aspects when we think about product strategy, and the ethical consideration and bias, and really careful about the hallucination, everybody knows. So, making sure that you are responsible, and if the output from AI is wrong or inaccurate, making sure you have, again, all the right approaches built in to kind of prevent that happening from an end customer perspective.
And Gene, I want to go back to something you mentioned in the first topic. You spoke about the possibility of UX-less products, and you sort of spoke about UX as a cage, right? As something that, do you see that as something that will be massively adopted?
Well, I certainly hope so. By the way, speaking of hallucinations, humans hallucinate too, thank God.
Yes.
It's called creativity. But at the same time, you're not going to put an artist in charge of the product configuration, right? Or a junior employee to the front line to answer customer questions. So in that sense, I don't think it's very different. As a company, you're responsible ultimately for what you're providing, and you're selecting the right employee, or maybe 2 years from now, the right bot to put in the right place. But still, ultimately, the responsibility is yours. And now I forgot what you asked me.
I was asking about UX-less.
Oh, that's right. That's my favorite topic. Well, I think the way it might happen, as just again a hypothesis, is that speaking also of the product development process, especially the ideation phase, because these things, the LLMs, know everything about everything, that's at least publicly available, they are great intellectual partners. And so in early stages of product definition, this is something that would previously cost you $1 million with McKinsey, literally. And this is why the initial quality and the skill set of the junior employees might come in much earlier, because now they're directly connecting the business problem to the potential solution with no coding inside. And so we might just, as I said, skip over the landline phase and get to the product definition phase with junior employees. But the way it might disrupt ultimately the lock-in is it's creating the critical mass of industry insiders in any given vertical who understand that to extract the solution to your problem, sometimes it's enough to just talk to the thing. Mm-hmm. That might be the inkling of how it's gradually going to get disrupted.
All right. Guys, I want to thank our panelists. Please help me thank our panelists here and have a great conversation.